Hey guys, it's MugenLord here, and I know most of you probably looked at this title of the video and is expecting a Nintendo diss, hate, or whatever, but this is clearly not the case. For those of you who follow me on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, clearly knows that I'm a Nintendo fan, but I'm not the kind of fan that blindly accepts anything that a company gives to them. I just think as a fan of a particular game company, you should be hard on them because you want to see them at their best, and in return as a fan, we will reap the benefits in the end, whether it's in great games, promotion, and other perks. I grew up playing Nintendo, and I can remember as far as back as playing Zelda on the NES at the age of 5. My father handed me a controller, and I was instantly zapped into another world. Zelda was the reason why I enjoy gaming to this day. From the rememberable soundtracks, the problem solving, and the countless hours of playing Mario trying to get better at completing a level that just gave me a hard time over and over again. That was the experience. Once I have received my own console for my 6th birthday, which was the Sega Genesis, I will get into that in another topic. That was the golden time of gaming for me, because all I had to worry about at that time was getting good grades in school, eating, clothing, and sleeping. You couldn't tell me as a kid that Nintendo wasn't a great console, which brings me to my next point. I don't know where some of these Nintendo fans get this idea that Nintendo doesn't need third-party support in order to survive this console race or to at least compete with Microsoft and Sony. A friend of mine in college literally said to me that Nintendo don't need games like Xenoblade Chronicles, Pandora's Tower, and Last Story, and that they can do fine without those titles like I just mentioned. How can you call yourself a Nintendo fan and forget that the SNES was highly regarded for its third-party games? If you wanted some great JRPGs, then the Super Nintendo was the place to go for the JRPG experience. Look at the JRPG library for the Super Nintendo that it had. You had Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3. Well, 3 was actually Final Fantasy 6 in Japan. Then you had Chrono Trigger, which is still one of my favorite RPGs of all time. Then you had Secret of Mana, my first three-player RPG experience. And then Secret of Evermore, Terra Negma, Breath of Fire, and the list goes on. Nintendo had top third-party developers like Capcom, Namco, Konami, all heavy hitters in the gaming industry, especially during the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo era. How can you possibly say that Nintendo doesn't need any third-party support? I think the problem with Nintendo of today is the fact that they are still trying to run things like Nintendo of yesterday. Back during the NES and SNES era, Nintendo had the ability to rule with an iron fist because there weren't anyone besides Sega who were willing to step up and challenge them. It was Nintendo's way or the highway, and third-party developers had no other place to go. But once PlayStation 1 came into the scene, there were ways for third parties to take their ideals elsewhere without hassle of Nintendo's strict rule to when and where they can release their games on their consoles. This is why you see third-party developers running over to Sony and Microsoft today. But to me, the main thing that hurts Nintendo the most is how they designed their recent consoles, starting with the Nintendo 64. Third-party developers wanted Nintendo to go disc instead of cartridges because it was easier to develop for and cost-effective. But Nintendo stayed with cartridges because they purposely wanted to discourage low-end developers from developing bad games for their platform. This is the kind of mindset that backfires, and it still does today. When Nintendo designs a console, they design it for themselves and not with third party in mind, which oftentimes leave third party developers in the dark. Like when Nintendo announced the expansion pack back during the N64 era, third party developers had no idea about this new hardware. That is why there was little to no games that utilized its capabilities. Nintendo were the only ones that used it with their first party titles like Zelda's Majora's Mask, Donkey Kong Country 64, Conker's Bad Fur Day, Perfect Dark, Jet Force Gemini. The only third-party developer that I can recall using the expansion pack was THQ with WWF No Mercy. Well, MugenLord, what about Nintendo's success with the Wii? Well, in my opinion, the Nintendo Wii and its success was based on pure luck. Nintendo stepped into an uncharted territory that was mostly unpredictable. To this new audience, which many people call it the casual gamers, was a target that Nintendo blindfolded themselves and took a dart and threw it, hoping that it lands on a bullseye, and it did. There were some third-party developers on board with the Wii because of its install base, which brings me to my next point. Nintendo is always one step behind its competition as far as specs and tech when it comes to its consoles. Graphics isn't everything, and the Wii proves that. But when certain aspects of gaming becomes the norm, Nintendo seems to fall behind in that category. I am all for innovation and being different, But if it's going to alienate third-party developers from developing for your platform, then what's the point? While Microsoft was leading in online gaming with the Xbox 360 and Sony following behind, Nintendo still had this ideal that gaming should remain in the living room with family and friends, which I have no problem with because I have friends and family close by to play games with. But in today's society, mainly here in the States, people don't gather and socialize like they used to. Let's face it, people much rather sit in the comfort of their own home and just play online with other players without having to leave their bedroom or living room sofa. The Wii suffered badly with their online gaming. Smash Bros. In particular was a big disappointment in that regard, and the only game that played real good on the Nintendo Wi-Fi was Mario Kart. Nintendo is about making affordable consoles, and oftentimes means sacrificing something else. Now, we are in a new generation of consoles, and Nintendo is still designing their consoles for themselves and not with third-party developers in mind. Don't get me wrong, I love the gamepad, but I don't see any real use for it but convenience of playing anywhere in your home space. This to me is what threw third-party developers off. Now, developers can't simply port a game over to the Wii U without coming up with a way to incorporate the pad. This calls for research and development just isn't worth the time to port it over to the Wii U. The console also lacks an Ethernet port while focusing on Wi-Fi connection. I just think it's backwards, and it's time for them to start shaking up the corporate executive office by axing some of these old traditionals with some new blood to shake things up just a bit. When Nintendo officially announced the official name of their new console, Wii U, I said this could either hurt them or help them. They figured naming it the Wii U by keeping the name Wii would continue to capture the casual gamer while at the same time advertising it to the hardcore gamers. This is why I said Nintendo had gotten lucky with the Wii. The casual gamer is too unpredictable, and now that smartphones are getting more powerful, the casuals don't need a dedicated gaming console, especially when they have their phone with them 24/7. The average consumer hardly understood that the Wii U was a new console. Hell, my daughter's mother came over to visit me and saw the gamepad and say, "Hey, isn't that the new controller for the Wii?" I said, "No, it's for the Wii U." She said, "Wii U? What's that? Wait, Nintendo has a new system?" That clearly shows that Nintendo had no idea what audience they wanted to target with the Wii U. So, now, Nintendo once again alienated their fans and third-party developers. They had a whole full year to capture the market, and they have done nothing with it. This being their first HD console was part of the problem for the fact that developing for their games took longer, because this is their first time entering the HD space compared to Microsoft and Sony, who has been doing it for over a decade. I was honestly disappointed when I reserved my copy of the Wii U and found out that there was no definitive experience out of the box. Once I finally got my hands on it, the launch titles were games that were pretty much released on last gen consoles. So I clearly thought Nintendo would become top dog again with this console. How could you go wrong? I can not only get my Mario, Zelda, and Metroid fix along with their other great first party games, but I could also get my Grand Theft Autos, Destiny, Watch Dogs, and more. But Nintendo just blew it. Like Dr. Trey would say, Nintendo would have been the definitive console of all your favorite games. But I would give credit where credit is due. I believe Nintendo is now have their back against the wall, and now they are pulling out all the stops with the new Mario Kart 8 DLC. Also, they're licensing their first party characters to third-party developers, like for example the Hyrule Warriors, and also allowing Evo to stream Smash Bros. For the competitive scene. It's a start, and just like Sony last gen was doing horrible in the beginning, but picked up the pace later on in its console life, I'm willing to give Nintendo that benefit of a doubt. There are other Nintendo fans out there who aren't blindly looking past their faults and calling out on them, like Richard Review Tech USA, Shokyo, and Black Bond, even though most don't agree with his methods of expressing themselves about Nintendo's actions, but they all think Nintendo can do better and should do better. And if you are a Nintendo fan, you should too. So, what's your opinion on Nintendo's situation on third party and its console install base? What can they do to turn things around? Leave your comments in the section below. This is MugenLord signing off.